Okay. Thank you, President McCormick, Dr. Frazier. Thank you for having me back to Shriner. It's always great to come to the Texas Hill Country and be involved with all the great things y'all are doing up here. My topic could not possibly be broader: law in Texas. Um, and that's sort of intentional. So I'm going to go at this point from the specific to the general. And my goal in these few minutes is to do two things. Number one, emphasize the importance of context, or maybe that's number two. Number one, to get you to raise some questions for you and to get you to raise some questions in your own mind, because I think that the key to not only learning but understanding history is to question and to think critically. One of the ways that I started to learn Texas history actually was studying the Rangers, much like Ben said with his book. Both accounts of their activities and the biographies of individual Rangers. The Rangers are truly unique among modern law enforcement agencies. To have started as a military force and evolved into one of the most storied investigative organizations in the world is remarkable. And what's so interesting is that as Texas has changed, so has the Rangers. As the law has changed, so have the Rangers. As law enforcement has changed, so have the Rangers. When I took the bench 20 years ago, I worked with the Rangers and continue to review their work. I call myself a last responder. And as such, I think I have a fairly unique perspective on the organization. I want to talk about a couple of concepts for everybody to think about and hopefully raise some questions. First, the law concerning the Rangers, and second, and something that so often gets overlooked, is the nature of law enforcement. In other words, what is necessary from law enforcement to make sure that the law serves its purpose, and have the Rangers succeeded in that area? That's the ultimate measure of a law enforcement organization. So first, the law. You know, the United States is unique among nations. Our founding fathers decided to combine the democracy of Athens and the republican structure of Rome. That was at once both innovative and complicated, but it was brilliant. And they created a system of government under which the most diverse populations, no matter how you choose to measure diversity, could live together and prosper according to their talents and work ethic. They created a system of government that allowed the individual, if properly applied, to reach his or her maximum potential. So that's fairly genius. And the secret to that is the law. The law is the glue that holds our society together, because the law applies to all of us equally, no matter what your history, status, or personal nature. We all have the same opportunities under the law, as well as the same responsibilities under the law. Of course, this system is dependent, as all systems of government are, on people, and people don't always perform to our expectations or with honor. Thomas Jefferson said about the law, quote, "Laws provide against injury from others, but not from ourselves," close quote. If we who are charged with enforcing, applying, or interpreting the law aren't conscientious, then of course the system breaks down. However, if individuals aren't performing in our society, we can throw them out of office, including me. Don't get any ideas. Or we can insist that laws are made to measure the performance and integrity of our leaders. Another unique aspect of our system is the ability to change a law that is not working or that no longer fits our societal needs or desires. If a law is not operating according to our notions of justice, we can change the law through our representatives and do so without violence. That's remarkable among nations. We directly elect representatives to make the laws that presumably reflect the will of the electorate. We then can change those laws or change those representatives to better reflect our desires. Now, change is cumbersome, and intentionally so as to better spread influence among the widest possible representation of the electorate. Our legal system does not like sudden, dramatic change. The law should evolve slowly to more exactly reflect the will of the people. Well, what then of law enforcement? Well, first we should recognize that law enforcement itself is subject to laws regarding how the enforcer of the law does his or her job. To protect, for example, your right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, the law has developed strictures that restrain what law enforcement can do and how they can do it when it comes to gathering evidence, Checkpoints in the process exist. Baseline facts must be established. Impartial eyes must examine search requests, etc., to ensure the protection of rights, and search and seizure is one of hundreds of examples I could give in that regard. So in other words, the law and its enforcement are integrated and interdependent. Now, Texas, of course, is unique among states. How Texas, as we know it, came into being is a story without parallel in American history. We were Mexico, we were a republic, we are a state. It's important to understand that because these different aspects have made indelible impressions on our Texan society. Much of our law is from Mexico, and derivatively from Spain. Concepts such as community property between spouses, the exemption of a homestead from execution by creditors, those are Spanish legal concepts. As a republic, we Texans developed a fierce pride in our independence and self-reliance. We established a society without the United States originally, and as you often hear in some popular discourse at least, we could do it again if we had to. And of course, joining the United States put us in with the ups and downs of American society through the years, as well as the trends and landmarks of American law. But the essence of the American and therefore the Texas legal system is a phrase that unfortunately gets abused in our modern discourse, and that phrase is the rule of law. Too often in today's polarized and frankly immature climate, the rule of law is often used as a bludgeon with which to club those with whom you disagree. But those political positions you're beating each other up over exist as they must outside the actual law. When a legal decision goes one way, those that perceive that they lost accuse the judge of violating the rule of law when in fact he or she did just the opposite. You just don't like the outcome. The dictionary definition of rule of law is simple. It is, quote, the restriction of the arbitrary exercise of power by subordinating it to well-defined and established laws, close quote. In other words, we're all subject to the same law, no matter how much power or authority we may have or may not have. Former White House counsel Cheryl Mills puts it this way, quote, if you love the rule of law, you must love it in all of its applications. You cannot only love it when it provides the verdict you seek. You must love it when the verdict goes against you as well, close quote. I know, it's hard to do. I've been charged with administering the rule of law, at least in district courts where I've presided and now on the Court of Appeals for a decade. I can say with confidence that properly applied, the American legal system is the best one ever devised to allow us to enjoy the full fruits of freedom. However, and this is critical, the law does not act. People act. And enforcing the law is the key to its perfect function. That's where organizations like the Texas Rangers enter the picture. But law enforcement does not exist in a vacuum. Law enforcement functions in a context, a societal context. Societal context obviously changes over time. And that context becomes most important when discussing 200 years of history of a law enforcement organization. What was necessary from a Texas Ranger in 1823 is radically different from what will be necessary in 2023. In 1823, the idea of a ranger had nothing to do with policing. It was a military concept, still is a military concept in its technical sense, placing your defenders in the field to take the fight to the enemy and keep it away from your settlement. Of course, Austin's early colonists needed exactly that in 1823. So the function of a Texas Ranger was a military function rather than law enforcement as we understand it today. Of course, I guess you could characterize it as law enforcement since the Austin's colony existed as a product of Mexican law. That's the type of thing law students discuss between classes, so we won't do that here. The important point is that the mission was a military mission. And this situation is not new. You know, a fascinating area of study for me has always been the Spanish mission period in Texas and the conflict between priest and soldier, government and church. The Franciscan friars faced the same dangers as Austin's colonists, so really everyone who tried to make a go of it here needed that type of protection. And the Rangers were born, we claim, as Texans in 1823 as a product of that need. And that raises a concept we should all keep in mind when discussing these matters. In the immediate moment, faced with a crisis requiring what we now perceive as a law enforcement response, what will you do? In modern times, we fear the carjacker, the mugger, the burglar. What will you do if you're faced with an armed assailant? Not only your tactical response, but what is the right response, the legal response, or the moral response? Well, our legal system is founded upon certain concepts, including natural law, the natural right we all have to defend ourselves. Texas takes this a little farther and will allow you to defend your property in certain circumstances. So what will you do? Our modern law enforcement officers face this decision frequently during their careers, in the present time all too frequently, and so did the Rangers throughout their history. Take the early 19th century. Riding in small groups far from any settlement, the Ranger depended on the gun and the knife. That's all he had. Encountering the threat they were defending against meant, in all likelihood, a life or death encounter. So what is the right thing to do? Well, the right thing to do is win the fight. That's the right choice, it's the moral choice, and it's the effective choice to prevent the violence from making it to the places you're charged with defending. Boiled down to its essence, when it's them or you better do what it takes so it's you. And that's what law enforcement is on any frontier, including early Texas, and that's legal. And it's also natural. People are going to do that no matter what law you write in the books. So take that to the field in the middle and the late 19th century. As the context changes, the Rangers' primary mission then was to defend the frontier against Indian attack. I'm a member of an organization called the American Law Institute, and I'm on two task forces, the law of policing and the law of the American Indian. So my modern efforts intersect with those in the 18th century, but thank God the context is radically different. And I've published on that topic. In the wild world of the 19th century Texas frontier, as we all know, there was a constant state of active conflict. Indian raids resulted in burned homesteads, stolen property, and dead bodies. It was war of a fashion, no matter how some people would characterize it. So the question again becomes, what do you do? What does law enforcement look like in that context? What does it even mean? Can you even call it law enforcement? To examine this question as Texas became a republic and then a state, you have to understand that Texas now had a legal system in place. We had territorial borders, at least relative to other states and other nations, and time does not permit it to discuss the complexities of Indian relations, although I'd love to do it at our panel time. For law enforcement purposes, however, we had those borders and a system of laws governing our society within those borders. But Texas was still about half wild. There was no law. And again, no matter what you write on the books, it matters little when you're on the frontier. By the way, Texas got its first penal code in 1856. Prior to that, the legislature would pass single laws that would address certain conduct, but largely relied on the common law for the prosecution of criminal activity. But structure started to evolve, and law enforcement can start to look a little more modern. And you might say, well, okay, now we're getting somewhere. We've got some laws, we've got common law, we've got statutory law, we've got some borders, we're starting to get counties, the counties are starting to expand. This is getting easier to understand, but it's really not. As I mentioned a second ago, Texas is still about half wild. All the laws and all the towns and all the counties probably only cover half the state. So now what do you do? Now what is the need for law enforcement? I'm going to jump around in time here, but so we have the penal code in 1856. Let me go back 12 years before that, and let's think about what kind of law was required. So in 1844, the 8th Texas legislature meets, and they passed an act, and it authorized John Coffee Hayes to form a company of rangers. And it's enlightening for this purpose to look at the language that they used. Section 1 of the act provides that Hayes is authorized to raise, quote, one company of mounted gunmen, close quote. So what Texas needed in the eyes of the legislature was not police officers, constables, or even rangers, but one company of mounted gunmen. Where did they need this? Well, Section 3 tells us, quote, that the said company shall range on the western and southwestern frontier from the county of Behar to the county of Refugio and westward as the public interest may require, close quote. Public interest, I might mention, is not defined. Section 6 allows the President of the Republic to extend the term of the existence of Hayes's company should he believe that, quote, the public interest or safety requires it, close quote. That's a very loose set of instructions. So you can see that the needs of frontier Texas were vastly different than the needs of urban Texas, or should we say more settled Texas. So how then can we define, understand, or even criticize law enforcement and the Rangers? The role was still quasi-military because that's what frontier Texas required. To consider the Rangers a police force and judge their actions by our modern notions of policing is presentism, and it's a failure to understand the nature of the threats faced on the Texas frontier. A similar analysis applies with the creation of the Frontier Battalion in 1874. Context is critical. In 1901, we have a different Texas. The Indian threat is gone, the Mexican border was relatively quiet, at least in 01, and the legislature decided this new context required a revamp of the Rangers. Now, it's important to understand that immediately prior to this time, the word Ranger had been co-opted to mean something other than what we should think of as Texas Rangers today, meaning an organized force designated as the Texas Rangers that we're all familiar with. You had other kinds of Rangers. You had Special Rangers, or sometimes called Loyalty Rangers. These types were often political partisans. They had little to do with the Texas Rangers as we should understand them. The legislature in 1901 passed House Bill 52, providing for the organization of what was called a Ranger Force. Now, the preamble of this bill said that the purpose of the Rangers was to protect, quote, the frontier against marauding and thieving parties and for the suppression of lawlessness and crime throughout the state, close quote. The act was also fairly specific about the duties and authority of the Rangers, and it began to shape the role as more recognized law enforcement role with reference to such things as delivering prisoners to the county sheriff. But merely creating such a force and specifying their duties does not dictate the conditions under which they will operate in the field. As this group of Rangers began to work, conditions on the border heated up, as we have just talked about. So in the context of the border, once again, the role of law enforcement became even more dangerous. And for example, the Porvenir massacre had a context. The movie discusses the raid on the Bright Ranch. Christmas Day, 1917. However many raiders there were, what it didn't mention is that in that mail wagon were 2 Mexican citizens who were shot and left for dead, in addition to the driver being murdered. Also missing from the context is what happens afterward at the Neville Ranch, March 1918. Neville and his son is, there were about, we don't know how many, but probably 17 people opened fire on Ed Neville and his 18-year-old son, Glenn. Ed escapes, later finds Glenn shot in the head, and or his head caved in and shot. A Mexican lady that worked on the ranch had also been shot in the head and her body horribly mutilated by the raiders. Her children witnessed this. Thankfully, they were not harmed. The U.S. Army later tied that raid to relatives of some of the victims in Porvenir. So context matters. Any of these 3 incidents, each of them are horrible, horrible incidents. But none of them exist, nor should they be judged in a vacuum. Now, can we even discuss any of this in the context of law enforcement? How do you regulate a dangerous frontier? Well, Texas had further evolved by 1935 when the legislature created an independent agency called the Department of Public Safety, overseen by a state commission. Texas cities were growing. The public was getting fed up with some of the corruption in the 30s. The first 2 divisions of the Department of Public Safety were the Highway Patrol and the Texas Rangers. This statute gave the Rangers the statewide jurisdiction they have today. It professionalized the Rangers and helped complete their evolution from frontier military force to the modern investigative agency they are today. Once again, the context has changed. Overall, one of the privileges of my state service has been my interactions, both professionally and personally, with the Texas Rangers. To a man and woman, the ones that I know and have known represent the best of Texas. Few other countries can claim an agency older than its very jurisdiction. Few places can claim the unique history and evolution of Texas. The agency began as agents of a subdivision of the Mexican state. They exist as one of the most elite investigative agencies in the world. As Texas has evolved, so have the Rangers. As the law has evolved, so have the Rangers. As the public safety needs of Texas have evolved, so have the Rangers. And when viewed in context, it has been a hell of a ride. Thanks very much, Dr. Fraser, for having me this morning. Look forward to the panel.